provide a response. So other live events that we have here on Rouxbe will have a topic or a theme. These office hour live events are a little different in that we're really just here to answer your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in. If you are new to this platform and you've never asked a question before, it's really simple. Right next to the video player box where you see me talking, there's a little area you can type in a question. When you have typed it in, click the black button that says add. That puts it into a moderation queue for us to have a quick look at it before we publish it. So please do take this opportunity to ask your questions. So first question that we have today comes in from Deb. It says, I have read that plant sterols are good for naturally reducing cholesterol. Do you know if this is true? And what might be a good source of plant sterols? So Deb, this is getting a little bit into the health and wellness realm for sure. I would say that, when it comes to, me knowing if it's true or not, that sterols have been shown to reduce cholesterol. I'm not a medical doctor, but it's my understanding just based on the literature that I have read that there's a lot of studies that do show that plant sterols can reduce the LDL-C, the low density lipoprotein cholesterol, the generally what's called the bad cholesterol, let's call it. So there are studies that do say that diets high in plant sterols can reduce LDL-C. In terms of foods that are naturally containing these, it's a pretty long list. Again, I'm not real expert in this area. You should talk to your healthcare, your medical professional. But a lot of nuts and seeds are going to be high in sterols. Say plant-based foods generally, grains, nuts, seeds, some fruits and vegetables, even the oils from things like sesame seeds or from nuts would be high in plant sterols. So hopefully, Deb, that helps you. But again, I'd probably talk to your healthcare professional just to see what it is you're trying to do exactly, if you're working on your own cholesterol or what sort of a health benefit you're looking for. Next question, I'm going to pass this one to Chef Rick, but how to plan takeaway lunch dinner menus for home-based catering business. Any criteria or guidelines? Thanks. That's a question from RT. Chef Rick, I'll pass that one to you.
Okay, thank Ken. RT. Whenever you're planning a menu, you have to take into consideration a few factors. First and foremost is your audience, who are you catering to, and what categorical needs do they are missing, or are they craving? That's really important. Obviously, normally when you're setting up a restaurant first time, you create the menu first, and then you get the equipment that's necessary in order to produce the volume that you're anticipating for that restaurant. So in this case, I'm assuming that you already have a home-based kitchen set up, and so your equipment is going to be somewhat, a restraint on what you can do on your menu. So start off with what you're capable of producing in the volume that you hope to be, best case scenario. Create a menu around that. Make sure you have the proper documentations necessary in your area. And you can grow from that. And that's the beauty of catering is if you don't have a piece of equipment that you need in order to do something, you can rent it. And once you've paid for that, then you can buy your own, and you're going to start to expand and grow your business in a safer manner than making one lump sum investment in a restaurant, a brick and mortar. So the idea of takeout today is quite viable. It's kept a lot of businesses even or maybe even better during this COVID-19 crisis. So the best thing you can do is know what your strengths are, create a menu that's most interesting to you based on the focus of your targeted audience, and grow your company along with it, making sure that, of course, you adhere to the guidelines of the different organizations that might sit on you a little bit, like such as health and et cetera. You need to make sure that you're practicing safe procedures. And probably one of the biggest expenses and the most surprising expense you'll find with takeout is containers are not readily available as they used to be because of that increase in that sector of the market in general. So, RT, it's a great way to start a business. It's certainly very fulfilling. Hopefully you'll do well, and I hope that I've been helpful to you. I'm going to throw it back to you, Ken, for next question.
Wonderful. Next question says, thank you both for this great Q&A, Chef Rick. I also hate to toss things out. Is there anything I can do with the tasteless remains for making vegetable stock? Question from Sharon for you, Chef Rick.
Okay. Thanks. Sharon, the tasteless remains from making a vegetable stock has a lot of fiber, still has nutrition because you don't extract every last bit of nutrition. For myself, in my home, and when I say my home is my office too. So I work out of my home and I'm developing recipes for the company that I work for, Perry's. So I make a ton of compost. You can never have enough compost, but compost for me is black gold because I grow a lot in my environment here in Las Vegas. So, I mean, that is always the first. I mean, I'm actually getting some chickens. If you have any animals, chickens will eat that. What else are you going to do with the fiber? You could, I guess you could feed it to animals. You could, compost to me would be the number one solution because when you end up with that beautiful compost at the end, it's better than any fertilizer you can get your hands on. And you know it came from you, and you can create your own recipe, and it's another project you can have. And you can I think that's about it. I think those are the number one and number two things that I would do with the remains of my veg stock. I hope that's helped you, Sharon. Ken, I'm gonna throw it back at you for the next question.
Wonderful. Yeah, appreciate that. I don't know that I would use that remains of the vegetable stock for something in a culinary setting. It's just not going to get a lot of flavor out of that. So I would agree that compost is probably not a bad bet, or finding some fiber basis to use it with. Next question. Hi, my name is Marilyn. I'm just starting. I joined last week. My first question is, I saw the recipe for cashew cream, and I saw it with so many different ingredients. I'd like to make a dessert one. So Marilyn, it's really, I would say, pretty easy to take your base concept of a cashew cream and work on it in a way that makes it very simple. I would say that making it a sweet flavor profile is pretty easy to do. A lot of the cashew creams that we have really, I think, lean in that savory direction, kind of the acidic. White wine and garlic and allium and those sorts of things. But I'd say if you just want a dessert one, a simple thing to do would be to use some kind of a sweetener. So it could be fruit puree, it could be maple syrup, adding some other flavoring basis. So it could be lemon zest or lime zest to have some citrus type elements to it. You can make it also have a certain spice characteristic to it. So you can add potentially warm spices, cinnamon, clove, these sorts of things. You can add cocoa powder and make it kind of chocolate cashew cream, which would be very, very good. We've seen students add different kinds of like liqueur, so amaretto, frangelico, those things would also make a pretty interesting cashew cream. So I would say sky's the limit. The base of just starting with cashews that you soaked and spun in a high-speed blender is going to be your starting point, though. So have fun with that. Good luck. Next question. Rick, if you have one piece of advice regarding pan frying a piece of fish, temperature, pan, etc., what would it be? Thanks, Brian.
Okay, Brian, great question. I mean, as in cooking anything, but fish needs to cook quickly. You don't want to overcook your fish. It's the number one wrong turn that you can make when you're normally cooking most fish. So what I would do is coat it with whatever coating you want to put on it, whether it's, if you want a crispy coating at the end, you either make a batter, like a beer batter, or you can make a standard breading procedure, which is flour, and add any seasonings along the way as you want. I usually just season the fish and leave everything kind of plain, maybe some herbs. But flour, egg, and then breadcrumbs, panko, or whatever crunchy out exterior you want. Now, as far as what pan, I always choose a pan that's going to maintain the temperature most evenly, which is a thicker, heavier pan. So I tend to go towards cast iron, especially if I'm, if there's going to be splattering, I like the higher side cast iron so that it's not going all over my stove. But if that's not a concern of yours, a lower pan's fine, because pan frying is not deep frying. So usually the oil, once you've added the protein, the oil usually comes halfway up the thickness of the fish. In this case is what we're speaking over the protein. So you put a good slick of oil in there and take a little bit of the breadcrumbs, after it's gotten a chance to heat up, and just sprinkle them in with your fingers. There's a couple of pieces. And you'll see if they immediately start to fry up or they start to bubble around the sides, that's around the temperature that you want it to be. If for some reason it tends to be too hot, add just a little bit more oil to cool it down, then add them right away. Or if you don't overcrowd your pan. You don't want the pieces of fish touching each other. Whenever you're cooking anything, you want to have a slight gap when sauteing or pan frying, because once they are attached to each other, the pieces that are touching are not cooking at the same rate as anything else. If you want it to be completely crispy on all sides, make sure there's a gap. Always peek under it once you've got the first side that went into your pan crispy brown to your desired. Flip it over and always flip it away from you so that you're not splashing oil towards you. Hot oil on the hands, no fun, especially not in the face. As far as actual temperatures, if you're going to be using a thermometer, very rarely used in pan sauteing or pan frying. I think the breadcrumbs are good, and if you don't want to have any breadcrumbs in your, you can always stick the back end of a wooden spoon, a dry wooden spoon in there, and it bubbles up just the same as if you were to put a breadcrumb in there. So those are my usual go-to methods of determining the proper temperature, amount of oil, and what to put on my fish when pan frying. And thanks for the question, Brian. Back to you, Ken.
Awesome answer. Yeah, I really appreciate the detail there on that technique, getting that pan nice and hot, and also the safety consideration when you're talking about flipping something when you have the potential for splashing yourself. So super important information. Next question here from Marilyn. Can I use date syrup instead of dates? And if it says 5 dates, what amount do I use of date syrup? So I would say, yeah, if you're trying to sweeten something and dates are going to be your mode of sweetening, that using a date syrup or a date paste is great. I would say if you're looking at the equivalencies of a syrup and 5 dates, I'd say it's kind of a hard equivalency to make because it's hard to know exactly how thick that syrup or that paste, that thinned out paste might be. But I would say if I'm making a syrup and I have 5 large medjool dates, I think I can probably make about a cup or maybe slightly less than a cup of syrup using those dates. Again, it depends how plump they are, how much they've swollen during the soaking period, and what the ultimate consistency of that syrup I'm looking for. Syrup can be kind of light and drizzly. It can also be more thick and more paste-like. So it just depends on the level of water in that syrup when we talk about a date syrup. But generally, I would say using a dried fruit to make a syrup or a thin paste that could be used as a syrup is going to be a really, really great way to sweeten foods, but with some flavor, right? It's not just sugar. It doesn't just provide sweetness, but something like dates or figs or other dried fruits also lends a huge amount of flavor to what it is you're preparing. Next question here. Could you recommend a plant-based Japanese cookery book for beginners? There are lots of great cookbooks out there, I think, for Japanese food. One that comes to mind that's plant-based, I would say Elizabeth Ondo, Andoh. Elizabeth Ondo is an amazing writer. She's written a ton around Japanese cooking, and she's been living and teaching in Japan for many, many decades. She's a really, really amazing teacher. Elizabeth Ondo has a book and I'm not recalling the title right at this moment, but she has a book that is about the topic of vegetarian Japanese cooking. I want to say it came out maybe 2009, 2010, thereabouts. And just can't recall the title, but if you look Elizabeth Ondo and just do a Google search, maybe vegetarian Japanese, it should come right up. But she's a really, really good author, very, very thorough researcher as well. Next question, with regard to honing a knife, do either of you have a preference between a steel or ceramic honing tool? Is one better than the other in your opinion? Question from Sunny. I'll start this one, Rick, and then I'll pass to you. But I would say, no, I don't really have a preference. For 20 plus years, used just a conventional steel and received a ceramic honing rod as a gift a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And I like it a lot. I use them both. I don't actually find that much of a difference between the two. I find the real key to knife work being more in the sharpening step and making sure that the knife is actually sharp. So when you're honing it, you're really doing that work of making sure that blade is nice and straight. Chef Rick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on honing versus sharpening.
Yeah, you pretty much covered it, Ken. I believe the purpose of a steel is to straighten out the blade, like you said. It's not to sharpen it. So that's a misnomer to think you're going to sharpen your knife on a steel. That doesn't happen. That happens on a stone or an alternative way of sharpening your knives. To keep it true, that's what you're doing. You're truing the edge of your blade. So let's say this is your blade here. You know, it becomes a little off as you're using it. It loses its straight edge, and that's what your steel comes in. I prefer personally the metallic one that has the diamond powder on the outside of it. I find that to have the most longevity. I use a steel often, and in the process of using a steel, you end up adding grease or some sort of fat ends up on the steel itself. Very hard to clean the ceramic over the steel, in my opinion, in my experience. So if I were to purchase a steel, and they're not expensive, get yourself an inexpensive 12-inch diamond dusted steel and use it with pleasure and much success. You know, and you don't have to put a lot of pressure on them. It's just very light, both sides, and you're back to work. Kicks you right back into the process, and it usually does a great job. So I prefer metal over ceramic personally. So back to you, Ken.
Awesome. Thank you, Chef Rick. It looks like Patrick and Randall both were able to get the name of that book that I was trying to recall. Elizabeth Ondo, the book is called Kansha, which is celebrating Japan's vegan and vegetarian tradition. So there's the reference there for those of you who are looking for that intro Japanese plant-based book, Elizabeth Ondo. So thank you for posting that. Next question here. I feel stuck because my plan before COVID was to go to culinary school. Is there something, or is there anything you could recommend to us aspiring chefs to do during this time to further our career? I'd say that in light of not being able to be in person in a cooking school, I would say a lot of students are definitely coming to Rouxbe or doing a culinary school close to home, and even being supplemented or having additional resources through Rouxbe would be one really good option. Jonathan, I think I would also suggest that just because there's so much happening right now that's creating so much change within the space, the more that you can do to really position yourself as being different or unique or leveraging some particular angle is going to be really, really key for you. So just keep learning, stay inspired. Learning online is one great option right now, but certainly whatever it is that's giving you the motivation, the interest, maintain that. That's going to be really, really key. Next question, when is the next online class? I have a few friends that are interested. So Christine, we have lots of online classes starting all the time. So if there's a particular course that they have an interest in, they can email us directly, studentservices@rouxbe.com, or if they just simply go to the website and click around and find the course or courses that they're interested in, that can also be a really good place to look. Those things tend to be pretty clearly labeled on our website in terms of start dates and things like that. So that should be very, very helpful. Next question. Are there websites that sell used cooking supplies, ladles, pans, silicone baking products? Gosh, Marilyn, I don't know. I'm sure there are websites that sell specifically used equipment. I know of some websites that sell used restaurant supplies, but this is, more home tools and things I think you're asking about. Chef Rick, are there any online resources that you've seen that specialized in used equipment, especially for home cooks? Just nothing's coming to me in terms of things that I've seen out there.
I don't believe that there are that I know of commercially or really as a mainstream. Usually small wares don't carry a great value, so you don't want to use up your inventory or your space of having inventory if you're trying to make a living out of it. The best thing to do is to go to personal websites, like eBay, etc., and look it up, as a category. That's what I would do if I was looking for some gently used equipment. I have a ton of equipment. Give me a call and we can help you out. But I'm saying for yourself, for whatever purpose it may be, whether it's commercial or otherwise, small wares I don't think I've ever seen used small wares other than a garage sale or something like that. And so I would suggest eBay would be your best way to go about it and get yourself up and running. Back to you, Ken.
Awesome. Yeah, I think probably the same thing. eBay or one of those more personalized type sites is going to be your best bet in that context. Next question here from BK. When I see a recipe that calls for wine but does not specify red, white, sweet, dessert, or dry, how do I know which one to choose? Good question. I think it really depends on the recipe. In many, many cases, I would say it's going to be a dry wine, probably a red or a white, again, depending on what it is you're doing. So if you're cooking something that has, deep, dark flavors, mushrooms, depth, those sorts of things, then maybe it's a red wine. If it's something that's a bit lighter, more acidic, some of those maybe more nuanced flavors, then certainly maybe a white wine. But in many cases, it should specify. And if you're unsure, you can email us directly at Rouxbe. We might be able to help you, or do a search and see what similar recipes require. So if you're doing something that calls for a wine reduction, and because of what you're cooking, it says, well, every recipe you see has white wine, then go for white wine. Also think about the appearance, the color. If you're doing something that has green veggies and you want to have something fresh feeling, red wine is not going to make the color of that dish look very good, whereas a white wine won't change the color of that dish. So just something to consider in terms of the overall dish. Next question, how do you clean your cast iron pans? I often hear no soap and water due to the rust factor. Chef Rick, I'm going to pass that one over to you, dealing with cast iron.
I love cast iron. Cast iron does require attention, but not a lot. Once you've seasoned your cast iron pan and you've cooked with it, and you have residual on the bottom and the sides, wherever, it doesn't matter. Let it cool off so it's not screaming hot. I have just like a brush. I mean, a sponge that has the green side, the spongy, whatever they're called. I'm not trying to promote a brand, scrubbies. And then I'll just gently rub it out. I'm trying not to rub off the black carbon finish on it. And once I do that, I dry it immediately and I put it in my oven. I put the oven on 350. When it reaches 350, I turn it off and I leave my cast iron in the oven. I'll go back, take a peek in there. If it needs a little oil, just on a paper towel, a little bit of flaxseed oil if you have it, or any kind of oil really. But you just want to avoid, olive oil, generally speaking, is probably the most readily available, but can get kind of tacky. So just a little oil to keep rust is going to happen almost immediately with cast iron. The last thing you want to do is take something that's really abrasive, like a steel brush or a steel pad, and really scrub it down. That black coating, that shiny black coating, is your friend. You want to maintain it. You can wash it quickly, dry it, and finish it in the oven for just a minute. Just turn it on, turn it off, and let it stay in there for a little while. To me, that's how I maintain my cast iron, and it's proven to be a really good method. So, Ken, back to you.
Yeah, great thoughts. I mean, I also love cast iron. I have a handful of cast iron pans. Some are very old from the 50s, and some are pretty new, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years. I'll say that, the recommendation for once they're cleaned, however you want to clean them, I would say following Chef Rick's guidance of not overly scrubbing them. You don't really want to have lots of abrasion or solvents and things like that. But certainly once you have it cleaned, getting it nice and dry, putting it in the oven or on the stove to just warm up and dry thoroughly using heat is going to be a really great approach. And I also just take a paper towel with just a very, very small amount of oil and just kind of give it another rub down if it needs it. It really depends on how thoroughly or how aggressively you had to clean the pan, depending on what you were doing with it the last time. Next question, a question for both Ken and Rick. What did you personally do with your vegetable trimmings and knife cuts when you were practicing your knife skills early in your career? Well, gosh, I could say that, just for myself, I had a lot of knife cuts that became purees, vegetable purees, components of soups or sauces or stocks. Just depending on what you're doing, the knife cuts can have some utility in some other way. But things that are odd or uneven or misshapen, generally work best in those types of scenarios where the customer, the guest, is not going to see it, right? They're not going to see that funny shaped vegetable or that end peel or whatever it is. It's going to get pureed or turned into a stock or a broth or included in some soup or family meal or something like that. But Chef Rick, what were some of the things that you did with trims and peels and odds and ends from your knife cuts?
Well, Ken, when I was practicing my knife cuts, I was working in professional kitchens, and there was always the marmite or the stock pots, and everything ended up in the stock pots. Everything, vegetable peelings, misshapen cuts that matter, like you said. Always when you're cutting or cleaning, even with herbs or etc., always think through what's the final presentation. If you're going to see the cuts, they're very essential. If the cuts are going to be, like you said, pureed, I'm repeating, pureed or otherwise processed or hidden, it doesn't matter as much. Just keep on going. You'll get to the point where you have the utmost of confidence, from brunoise to large dice. So stocks is the number one. Again, if you're not making a stock, you could freeze them and then make a stock, because you want to extract as much nutrition and flavor as you can out of them. It's never a bad idea. Or again, compost or something that it's going to have a secondary purpose, so that vegetable didn't die in vain. Best way to put it. And just be cognizant of the fact that certain things don't combine with other things. You don't want to have red peppers in with your vegetable stock unless that's a flavor profile that you're looking for. So common sense can kind of dictate what you do with the flavor combinations, but most of the time, Ken, I concur 100%. Get as much flavor by creating a stock and reduce it down and store it in your freezer. Put it in ice cubes. Make ice cubes out of it. Put it in a Ziploc bag, and then now you've got vegetable stock on tap. So those are my number one recommendations. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the biggest thing is making sure you can use it and find a way to extract flavor for it, in any case. And in those cases where it's not going to be so pretty or presentable, fine. You can puree it. You can find some other way to use it. Use it in a filling. It could be in a pasta filling or a ravioli. You can make a chutney or a relish or a salsa with some of those things. But yeah, finding just the right thing, the right approach is going to be the very first step. Last question for the day comes from John. Substitute for clarified butter when sauteing. What do you recommend? So clarified butter is different than whole butter in that it has a much, much higher smoke point. Whole butter, it doesn't do well with a lot of heat because it has, all the milk solids and all these things that tend to create color and aroma and flavor if they get heated too hot. So butter's not just fat. It's got all this other stuff. It's got water and solids in it, in addition to it being that basis of fat. So clarified butter doesn't have the solids, doesn't have the water. It's going to have a much higher smoke point, even approaching 400 degrees in some cases, 380, 400, somewhere in there. So you just want to kind of think about what's going to be, suitable in that context. So if I'm, thinking about doing something with a clarified butter and looking for an alternative, I'll probably just use another type of oil. It can be something like an olive oil that has a similar sort of mid-range type smoke point like clarified butter or ghee has, or just some other neutral oil. But the real benefit of using a clarified butter is you have a lot of flavor in that final product. Chef Rick, I'd love to get your take. Is there anything else I'm missing here about clarified butter or heating or oils to use in its place? Really about the flavor, right?
Absolutely. You nailed it, Ken. I think I can only reiterate a lot of what you just said. I mean, clarified butter or ghee, Ghee, you can purchase in a store and have in a refrigerator. If you're substituting clarified butter because you're not confident making clarified butter, I'm not sure why you want to substitute it. If you want to substitute it because you don't want to have the dairy involved, well, then you're going to lose that. You're going to lose that nuttiness. I like to use coconut oil a lot. It has a similar texture, mouthfeel to clarified butter when cooking. If I don't feel like clarifying butter, or if I'm going to just, I'll use, if I want the flavor of butter, I'll use coconut oil, and I'll just add a little bit of whole butter towards the end of the cooking to get the caramelization and the flavor that I'm looking for from the milk solids. So those are the two roads that I normally take when trying to substitute clarified butter. Thank you, Ken.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't even think to mention the coconut oil, but that's a great, I think, bridge in terms of the texture and having a richness or a depth of flavor, even. Of course, not the same as butter, but still much different in terms of how dynamic it is compared to other sorts of oils. Wonderful. That does it for all of our questions here today. Just wanted to thank all of you again for joining us at this Rouxbe live event. Also wanted to, of course, thank Chef Rick for his participation as always. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you, and take care. Happy cooking.